What if your property was being advertised online without your knowledge, without your permission, and sometimes even at a completely different price? It sounds impossible, yet it happens far more often than most property owners realize. Today we're going to explore one of the strangest and most misunderstood phenomena in modern real estate, the phantom listing. Welcome to the hidden psychology of property deals. I'm Yannis Kallieris. In this series, we explore the invisible psychological forces that influence negotiations, shape decisions, and affect the outcome of property transactions. Today's chapter is called The Phantom Listing. I remember a conversation with a property owner several years ago. He called me frustrated, not because he couldn't sell his property, not because he wasn't receiving offers, but because he had discovered something unexpected. His property was being advertised online. The only problem was, he had never authorized the listing. At first, he assumed it was a mistake, but it wasn't. And the more I looked into situations like this, the more I realized that not every property listing exists to sell a property. Sometimes, the property itself becomes the marketing tool. Most people believe that every listing serves one purpose: to find a buyer, to create interest, to complete a transaction. And most of the time, that is exactly what happens. But sometimes the real objective lies elsewhere. Sometimes the listing exists to generate phone calls, to attract potential clients, to create visibility for an agency, or to build the impression of market activity. When that happens, the property stops being the product and becomes the bait. Many times throughout my years in real estate, whenever I wanted to sell one of my properties using the traditional method, a simple for sale sign at the entrance of the building, I would receive phone calls from brokers pressuring me to send floor plans, contracts, and photographs. I would politely reply that I did not send anything unless I first received a formal agreement explaining the terms of our cooperation. After a brief conversation, the call would usually end. A few days later, I would suddenly discover my property advertised on a broker's website, often at a lower price than the one I actually wanted, using the wording from my original sale sign and even photographs of the building's exterior. That was the moment I understood something important. In real estate, there are listings that were never created in order to sell a property. They were created to attract owners. The process is usually very similar to what I personally experienced. The first contact almost always appears innocent. A short phone call, a rushed question, a tone of professional familiarity, a quick mention of the word broker, and a name you barely remember because it was spoken too quickly. The basic questions are always simple. Are you still selling it? You are the owner, correct? The owner answers positively, and within minutes the conversation changes direction. Send the floor plan. Send the contract. Send photos. We may already have someone interested. The entire process is presented as both normal and urgent at the same time. The owner begins to feel that perhaps the first serious buyer has finally appeared after weeks or months of waiting. He does not want to lose the opportunity, and that is how he slowly begins sending documents and information before any real cooperation agreement even exists. 3 days later, the property appears online using the material he provided, with photographs, with descriptions, sometimes even with a different asking price, without a signed agreement, without clear permission, without the owner even realizing that his property has already entered the market through a third party. This is the phantom listing, a listing that exists without a real representation relationship. The interesting part is that these listings are often not created to sell the specific property at all. A colleague of mine once called a broker who had listed one of my properties without authorization. The broker responded, "That one has issues, but I have another property I can show you." At that moment, everything became obvious. The property was functioning more as bait than as an actual product. The real objective was to make the phone ring, attract buyers, build a client database, and create the impression that the broker had strong market presence in a specific area. In other words, many listings are not actually saying, "I have this property." What they are really saying is, "I exist in this market." And unfortunately, that is where the first serious damage to the owner begins, because a property that circulates uncontrollably starts losing something far more important than price. It loses its sense of exclusivity. When it appears everywhere, it's across multiple agencies, with different photographs and inconsistent descriptions. Buyers no longer see an attractive property. They see a property that is circulating. And in real estate, anything that circulates too much eventually starts looking problematic, even when it is not. The market does not function only through objective information. It also functions through psychology. A property exposed excessively creates suspicion. Buyers begin asking themselves, why has it remained available for so long? Why does it appear in so many different listings? Why has nobody bought it yet? And this is exactly how a burned property is created. Not necessarily because the property itself is bad, but because the market became tired of seeing it. Law of the phantom listing. The more a property circulates without unified control, the less it resembles an opportunity and the more it resembles a problem. Equation of psychological devaluation. Devaluation equals number of listings times exposure time. In simple terms, the more different listings appear over long periods of time, the more market trust toward the property begins to decline. The paradox is that many owners initially feel satisfied when they see their property everywhere. They believe this means strong promotion and growing interest. In reality, excessive and uncontrolled exposure often produces the exact opposite effect. It resembles a product that is constantly advertised but never actually purchased. Serious buyers are not impressed by noise, they observe duration. If a property remains online for months across dozens of listings, buyers do not think opportunity. They think, why has nobody taken it yet? And from that exact moment, the negotiation slowly begins turning against the owner, because in real estate, excessive visibility does not always create demand. Sometimes it creates doubt. So what can property owners learn from this? First, always know who is advertising your property. Visibility without control can become expensive. Second, monitor where your property appears online. Different prices, different descriptions, and different photos create confusion, and confusion damages trust. Third, remember that exposure alone does not create demand. In some situations, too much exposure creates the opposite effect. It creates suspicion. One of the most powerful forces in any market is perception, because buyers do not only evaluate square meters, locations, and prices, they evaluate stories, they evaluate signals, they evaluate the feelings surrounding an opportunity. And once a property begins appearing everywhere, people start asking questions. If it's such a good opportunity, why is it still available? The phantom listing teaches us something important. Visibility and demand are not the same thing. More exposure does not always mean more value. Sometimes it quietly destroys it. Because in real estate, the market rarely reacts only to reality. It reacts to its perception of reality. And perception often becomes reality In the next episode, we'll explore one of the most powerful psychological weapons in negotiation, the low anchor technique, a simple mechanism capable of changing the outcome of a deal before the real negotiation has even started. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. New chapters and new psychological insights from the world of real estate are coming soon. And if you're currently selling a property, share this episode with someone involved in the process. It may save them from a costly mistake. I'm Yannis Kallieris. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next chapter of the hidden psychology of property deals.